Thank you very much, Bob. And thank you all for coming today. Bless you. Thank you. It is a joy to be back in Iowa. And I want to say my heartfelt thanks to Point of Grace Church for hosting this terrific event today. And I asked them how long I was given to speak, and they told me as long as I'm finished by Sunday service tomorrow, it'll be fine. Actually, I'm starting when I was supposed to be finishing, so you need to listen very fast tonight. For one reason, I want you to get home and catch my show on Fox News Channel. I need your ratings. It's job security, so please. I also want to say I appreciated so much what Marla said in expressing thanks to the Republican Party of Iowa. And I want you to know I've traveled all over the country and I've been to Republican Party events literally from Hawaii to the state of Maine, from Florida to California, and everywhere in between. This is the first time I am personally aware that a state party has ever held an event specifically to emphasize and to celebrate our commitment to the dignity, the worth, and the intrinsic value of every single human being. And I want to say thanks to the Republican Party of Iowa for taking the stand. It's been mentioned, but it's an important concern that we must address. There are some in our national party who would really like for us just to be quiet. They'd love for us to sit in the back of the bus. They'd love for us to give up our seats to those who have more affluence and wealth and who will write bigger checks. They would love for us to be quiet, except they'd appreciate it if we'd show up at rallies and scream and stomp our feet and wait for hours for the privilege of doing that when the candidates that they pick for us come and speak. And there are those who really appreciate us making phone calls and walking neighborhoods and passing out literature, but they don't really want to be seen in public with us too much because we're just a bit of embarrassment. Because when we talk about our commitment to the sanctity of every human life, it is not a political position. It is not merely a piece of the platform. It is a conviction in understanding that life is not a gift from the government, that life is a gift from God, and we will stand before Him and answer for whether or not we personally were involved in elevating the value of every human being. And as Martin Luther so eloquently said as he posted the 95 Theses on the door at Wittenberg, I hope that all of us, and across this country, Republicans like us, will say, here I stand, I can do no other, and we will stand on the issue of life. And if that is a problem for those who consider themselves the leaders of the party, please let us know now, because we'll find someplace else to be. But we will not recant or relent on the attitude that every life has value, because every life is a gift from God. And it is our responsibility to do all that we can from the moment of conception until God closes the door on that life to award it the dignity that every life deserves. So when someone says, well, we're going to help pick the candidates because we want to make sure that we pick the ones that are most electable, I'm telling you now that within the Republican Party, and I believe within the United States of America, the most electable candidates are the ones who can articulate that there is no such thing as a person who does not deserve the dignity of his or her life. I believe that one of the realities that we need to express to some of those who would like for us to disappear is that the tide has turned in this country as it relates to the life issue. 2 years ago, for the first time in America since Roe v. Wade, for the first time, both the Gallup and the Pew polls showed that more Americans self-identify as pro-life than as not being pro-life. And you know what's really significant about those polls? If you looked into the details of the poll, what you found was that the reason that the tide has turned and more Americans now identify themselves as pro-life is because younger women are more pro-life than their mothers and their grandmothers were. Ladies and gentlemen, this is good news on the life front. And by the way, to all the liberals who tell us constantly we just need to accept science, that science is so important and we need to just validate the facts of science, I say bravo. That'll get us to being a pro-life nation even faster, because the biology of life is irrefutable. There is no dispute. There may be a theological dispute about when life begins. There may be a philosophical dispute about when life begins. There is not a scientific biological dispute, because we know that when 23 chromosomes from a man and 23 from a woman come together and create, at the moment of conception, that unique DNA schedule, it has never existed before. That particular DNA schedule will never exist like that quite again. It is not merely an appendage of the mother, for if it were, it would have a mirror image of the DNA of the mother. It does not. In fact, sometimes it doesn't even share the same blood type as the mother. The baby that starts living at the moment of conception is a unique life. And it happened at the moment of conception. And all of the cellular reality and mapping that ever will be in that person's life happened at that moment of conception. That is irrefutable in terms of the science. So I say to the liberals, I say to those who want to celebrate abortion instead of celebrate life, join us in the science of reality. And join us in the affirmation that there is no such thing as a life that is disposable and expendable, that all life has value, and that's why we shall seek to protect it. And I'm grateful that the Republican Party of Iowa has taken a stand, and I salute this party and its leaders for having the courage, and let's just be blunt, having the courage to take a stand that may or may not be popular at all levels of our party. And I'm willing to let people believe whatever they want to believe. But please don't push me out the door because of it. Or if you do, there's going to be a lot of folks going with us. And I want to see, is it going to be possible for Republicans ever to win an election without those of us who are committed to something more than just what's in our pockets? Some of us believe that if we take care of our business in honoring human life, God will bless us economically, but God cannot, will not, and should not bless us economically if we destroy more than 1 million babies every single year who could have had a life. I just got back this past Tuesday from Israel, and it was one of about 20-something trips I have made there. My first one was 40 years ago this summer. I got to thinking about that, and I thought, the children of Israel only were in the wilderness 40 years. I've been going in and out of there all that time, and poor Moses never got to go. By the way, I was very young when I was there. I was all of 17, not quite 18, a month away from my 18th birthday. And something wonderful happened in that first visit, and it's why I've continued to go back. One of my joys now is to take people who've never been and to take them to see the places that they know by heart because they've read about it, they've heard messages, they've taught about it, and to take them to those places and to watch the emotion in their face as they realize they are at home in a place they've never been, which is kind of a unique experience. But in addition to all the biblical places, there's some other places that I always take the people who go with me. And one of them is in a little cemetery just across the street from Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Most people never visit this place. I happened to find it several years ago on a trip, and it intrigued me. And since that time, I've made sure that those who go with me go stand in that little cemetery to see one particular grave. There are several thousand graves in the cemetery, but there's one that I want them to see. It is the grave of Oskar Schindler. And if you remember the last scene in the movie Schindler's List, and the survivors, the Schindler Jews, walk and they place a stone on a grave. Well, that's where it was filmed, at his graveside. He's buried in Jerusalem. I want you to think about this for a moment. Here is a person who was a member of the Nazi Party. He was, by anybody's definition, a scoundrel and a notorious sinner. He cheated on his wife. He was a heavy drinker. He used people for his own gain, and in fact, one of the ways that he made his fortune was that he would exploit the labor force that he could get from among the Jewish people who had to work for free, virtually as slave labor, and then he made pots and pans and other metal goods for the Nazis. And by ingratiating himself with the Nazis, he got the contracts for all of those particular manufacturing. It's not that unlike what goes on in Washington today. People grease the palms of the politicians, who in turn then grease back the palms of those who are the donors and the financiers. So here's a guy who is, in every way, the kind of person that if he'd walked into Point of Grace Church, it would have been a scandalous moment. People would have looked around and said, "Do you know who's here? Oscar Schindler. That womanizing, heavy drinking, lying, cheating, filthy rascal. He really wouldn't have been very welcome in the typical church." And people would wonder, why was he there? And yet, there came a point in his life when he realized that the only thing standing between him and the murder of thousands of Jews who had worked for him was his intervention with the money that had been his God. And one by one, he began to literally purchase their lives. And he purchased 1,200 lives. And he saved those 1,200 people who have now had tens of thousands of descendants. The Jews have an expression: he who saves a life saves the whole world. I sometimes think that we could use a few more scoundrels. We could use a few more people who are notorious sinners if, in fact, they would intervene on behalf of human life. I ask you, who is the most righteous? Is it the person who sings the loudest, who prays the longest? Is it the person who has memorized the most Bible verses but never lifts a finger to intervene on behalf of another human being's life or death? Or is it the person who maybe has a lifestyle that is less than desirable, but who, when it really counts, is willing to stand between life and death for other human beings? And now we're called into this incredible holocaust of our own in America. 55 million babies. 55 million babies since 1973 have died in what ought to be the safest place in the world, their mother's womb. And it's become one of the most dangerous places for a baby to be. For us, this is not about the politics of Democrat and Republican winning and losing. It's about our capacity to one day stand before a holy God and give an account for whether we stood between life and death for those who had no voice but ours, who had no hands to raise and say no except ours. I want to mention today that the heart of the pro-life movement is not about trying to end abortion as much as it is to try to help people understand that abortion ends when we elevate every human life as a life of value. And the ultimate goal and the message that we must articulate is that there is no such thing as a life that is expendable, disposable, and unworthy of being treated with dignity and respect. Our founders said it eloquently in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these things, these truths, to be self-evident. That all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. It is not the government who has the right to determine the value of our life or the nature of our death. And our founders recognized this. Though they didn't get it all right, they understood that all of us have a sense of equality, because our equality comes from the fact that we have our roots and our origins not merely by human hands, but that our creation is the result of a divine intervention. And they saw it that way. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with those unalienable rights. It is not the job of government to give life or to decide who gets to take it. It is the job of government to protect that which God has given us responsibility for. And in the case of an unborn child, it is the life of those most vulnerable that it is our duty to protect and to seek to preserve. Now, we've spent, for the last 40 years in this country, since Roe v. Wade, we've taught the idea that life can be expendable if the life represents a social disruption or a financial hardship on the biological mother. I mean, that's the basis of abortion on demand. Well, I can't really carry this baby because I'd have to drop out of college. I can't carry the baby because it would cost me a promotion at work. I can't carry the baby because my mother will be furious at me if she finds out I'm pregnant. My father will never understand this. So for the purpose of our social disruptions, or sometimes for financial hardships, I can't afford the baby. I understand the hardship, but I think we've got to be very careful never to be condemning of that young lady in the most painful and difficult moment of her life. I'm so grateful for what Marla said here today. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and her own story is a powerful one. A story of a frightened young girl having to make a very tough decision. And in her case, making the right one. And we shouldn't be condemning of those who make a different one. We should reach out to them with the same message of grace and redemption, but never waver from our message that life is precious. Now think about if we instill, as we have in this culture of ours, the notion that life is disposable if it represents financial hardships or social disruptions. Here's what we've told the generation coming after us, the generation of my children and now my grandchildren. We've told them that if they were expendable at that end of the spectrum of life because they just were going to be too expensive, or because they represented for us having to mess up our calendars, then we have now told them that at the other end of the spectrum of life, when they become our caretakers, we've already now given them permission. In fact, we have given them full rights to end our lives, because I guarantee you at that end of the spectrum, we will be a financial hardship to them, and we will represent a social disruption when they have to give up their weekends to come check on us in the long-term care center, and when they have to write the check every month for all of that expensive care that we're going to end up costing. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to make it much tougher for my kids to get rid of me than that. I'm telling you now, I am not going to go easily. There's a clear distinction between the political parties as it relates to the dignity of life itself. The other party, throughout its national convention, spent most of its time celebrating, not just acknowledging a right, but actually celebrating and elevating far beyond the right of an abortion, but the responsibility that they believe all of us as taxpayers have to pay for it, even when it violates the most fundamental element of our conscience. I've never been so shocked in my life to see speaker after speaker go to the podium in Charlotte at the Democratic National Convention and all but give a rallying cry that the single most important thing to them in all of America was not a stable economy, was not a secure border. It was not that we had peace within our country and that we were protected from enemies from around the world. It was not that we stopped terrorism. It was not that we had an education system that gave our kids the opportunity to become independent and self-sufficient. It was not that we would have a food supply system that would allow us to feed ourselves and not be dependent upon some foreign country to feed us. It was not that we would have our own energy resources where we could take care of ourselves and not be held slaves to some Middle Eastern tyrant who takes our money by the wads and then turns around and spends it to use against us, to murder us and kill us in the name of a perverted faith. No, that wasn't what was the most important issue. The most important issue was, I want to be able to take the life of my baby, and I want someone else to pay for it. And as I heard that, I thought, maybe I live on a different planet. Because I cannot imagine that a political party would believe that the single most important issue facing this country is to take the life of yet even more than the 55 million babies that we've already taken the life of. And this is why this is not an issue that needs to be on the back burner. Oh, I'm not saying it's the primary point of every speech we make politically. I'm not saying that it's going to be the entire agenda. Sure, we have to manage the whole processes. When I was a governor for 10.5 years, yes, I focused on education and health care and road building and all the things that are a part of governing a population of people. But at the same time, I never did, nor will I ever waver on every opportunity that God gives me breath to take to save the lives of those who are innocent, who have committed no crime, who have yet to even have a chance for their potential. And those of you in this room who would come out on a Saturday afternoon and that would give your attention and your efforts to celebrating life, you truly are the heart and hope of not just our Republican Party, but I believe of the United States of America. Billy Graham's wife, back in 1975, made a statement that I fear may be more prophetic than we ever could hope to hear. Ruth Bell Graham, I should say, in 1975 made the statement. She said that if God Almighty does not bring judgment on the United States of America for the sins against His holy cause, and she was referencing issues like our immoral behavior as it relates to children. She said, if God doesn't bring His fiery judgment upon America, then He will have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. And I wonder, how long can we last? Moreover, how long should we last if we sacrifice our own children on the altars of our selfishness? This is why this issue cannot be moved off our platform. And if it is, then I'll meet you somewhere outside the tent and we'll build a new one. But we will not silence our voices for life. I'm sure you can understand I'm traveling a lot these days. For one thing, I have to go to New York every week to do the show for Fox. A lot of travel in between. And by the way, I don't live in New York, and I don't plan to. And when people ask me, hey, aren't you going to move up there? I say, when Michael Bloomberg, the mayor, will let me duck hunt in Central Park, I'll think about it. Which is a nice way of saying it ain't ever going to happen. But Janet and I had to figure out what to do with some of our amassed frequent flyer miles. So Christmas afternoon, after our kids and grandkids started scattering to see the other side of the family, we flew to Europe and we went to see the beaches of Normandy, where incredible, brave, and courageous Americans shed their blood to stop a war. And it was an incredible experience. And then we went to Krakow, Poland, and we toured Schindler's factory in Krakow. And then we drove just a few miles, about 30 miles from Krakow, and we visited the Nazi camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau. I've been many places where I was deeply moved. But the sobering reality of standing in Auschwitz, in the very room where more than 1 million human beings had been marched into that room and murdered, was something I'll never, ever forget. And I stood there for a moment, and it occurred to me that I stood in the very place where over 1 million fellow human beings were murdered for no particular purpose other than they were in someone's way and represented an inconvenience to the Nazis and were the object of their hate and their scorn. And in their case, because they happened to be Jewish. It's inconceivable to me that in a nation that at the time was the most scientifically advanced nation on earth, as was Germany, with some of the best educated people in the world, with some of the finest, greatest, and most learned theologians in the history of Christianity in that country, with people who were not third world. These were highly educated, sophisticated individuals who allowed themselves to be duped into believing that it was okay to murder 11 million people, 6 million of whom were Jews, some of whom were disabled, and others were just in the way and happened to like the people who were getting murdered. And they were marched to their deaths. And many people have asked, well, why didn't they resist? I mean, there was 1,000 Jews to 1 Nazi. Why didn't they fight? 2 reasons. One, because they never could be convinced that something so horrible could actually happen to them. And the second thing was that the Nazis had taken away any capacity they had to defend themselves because only the government owned any of the weapons that would have been used to fight off those incredible, vicious Nazis who were going to kill them. Is there a lesson? Yes, there is. Since 1973, not 6 million, not 11, 55 million babies have been taken to their deaths. In a nation that is the most economically advanced, scientifically developed, educationally superior, a true superpower. And I ask you, not will God let us continue to stand as a nation if we continue to do this to the unborn. No, the real question is, should God let us stand? And I leave that to you. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. God bless you. Thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. And I trust we'll keep the stand. Thank you so very, very much.